Everybody, and welcome to Adobe Live. My name is Flynn, and I'm here with Tim Northey, aka TK North. How are you doing?
Good, man. How are you?
I'm really good, thanks. Great to have you back on Adobe Live. We kicked off. We're doing like a two-part session, which was awesome. Got stuck into some Lightroom last time that we were on. We're going to be getting stuck into a bit more of focus on the time-lapse photography stuff today, which is going to be heaps of fun. Just a shout out to some of the cool cats. Cool Cattens Kittens in chat. Festus is there. Johanna is there looking after us today. So that's awesome. If you're watching somewhere else, the chat that we're using today is over on behance.net/live. That's where you can always catch our live content. So if you're watching this on demand or anything, jump on over there to catch us live. So yeah, if you're on YouTube or anything like that, jump on over there. Festus says, hey, Tim, there you go.
Hey, guys. Hey, everyone.
What have you been up to in the last week since we've seen you before we get stuck in? Has it been a busy time for you?
Yeah, it's been a super busy week, actually, which is, as I said, it's a good problem to have. But yeah, I've had a few deadlines and a couple of shoots this week. So it's been a busy week, but a good week as well.
Busy but good. That's cool. How about I get some tunes going as well in the background? Let us know if that's too loud, guys. Hey, Demis Rusley is in the chat. Hello, Demis. Good to see you.
Hey, Demis.
So yeah, time-lapse photography. So I mean, like, this is the thing that you get asked about like all the time, right? So maybe you can give us, like, again, maybe for those that may have missed the previous session as well, like your approach to time-lapse photography and how much it is part of what you do.
Okay, yeah. I guess, well, for me, like, as a photographer, it's something, most of my work is more general photography. The time-lapse stuff is the stuff I really like doing though. So I'm always trying to take time-lapses where possible. I guess I kind of got into it more just playing around, and it's same with photography, more of a self-taught thing. So for me and time-lapse, I guess some of my approaches may be a little bit kind of different in the way I do things to normal ways, but it's how I've kind of developed, I guess, little techniques over the years. So
yeah, it's awesome. I love the hack that you showed us last time. Like, you probably say it better than me, but like, if you're in a space where, if you're doing a time lapse, obviously it needs to take a long amount of time, but you kind of showed us a way where you can kind of hack it a little bit, take two shorter time lapses and then kind of splice it together to achieve the same result, which is super cool, very practical.
Yeah, not quite the same result, but it's a different, I like it better in some instances as well. So it's a different way to shoot them, but and saves a lot of time, saves some hard drive space as well.
Yeah, and I like that when you were in Rome as well, and you said, yeah, we could just go over there and have a couple of beers and then come back and do the rest. And that's like my kind of creativity.
Same here. I like that.
Awesome. All right. Well, so we're going to get stuck into it today. Feel free to ask questions as we're going along. I know I'm going to have a lot of questions, but again, we're just using the chat on behance.net/live. Jump in, ask all your questions about photography, time-lapse photography, of course, and like any career stuff as well. We're here to answer. But yeah, should we jump over to your screen, Tim?
Yep, sounds good. I might just show a couple of examples of what I'm going to run through to start with.
Awesome.
For anyone who follows Instagram, I posted some of these last night, just some of the things I'll be kind of going through. So I'm going to walk through some hyperlapse stuff, which is like this clip here.
Cool.
So in this one, I've also like just created in post a little bit of a dolly zoom kind of effect with the hyperlapse. So might go through that in Premiere Pro.
Oh, that would be cool.
One's like this clip, which is just a really short sequence. So it's just basically shot in burst mode. So just holding down, it's still, I guess you'd still call it a time lapse, but a really short one, and then just looped. Again, one examples like that one and this one here.
Where are these shot? Where's this one? This staircase?
So this staircase is in the Vatican Museum in Rome.
Right.
So somewhere where you definitely can't take a tripod.
Yeah.
So it was basically shot handheld, just leaning up against the railing. So the beauty of Premiere Pro, usually, like, I can show you some of this footage later on, it's very shaky even though I was leaning up against the rail. So using warp stabilizer in Premiere Pro, you can save a lot of your footage as well. Same with this one, it was shot kind of leaning up against the rail where you couldn't use a tripod. So that one's the Natural History Museum in London, which is a really cool museum. It's probably one of my favorite museums that I've ever been to, for sure.
Oh, wow.
And then similar, this one, which I might go through first, is just another sequence, which again, I just made a really short kind of handheld, it's like a boomerang basically, but a really, really large scale boomerang because it's really large file size. And again, just shooting handheld and kind of use Premiere Pro to stabilize. So it's another technique that I like to do, way to get a nice little short video, and perfect for somewhere like Instagram where you can just loop it back. So I'll go through some of those, and then lastly I might just show some kind of simple keyframing, just zooming in and zooming out on time-lapse clips, which just helps add another dimension to some of these clips as well.
Yeah, awesome.
So I might jump in and get started.
Cool. Awesome.
So the first one I'll go through, I might jump into Lightroom to start with, and I'll just go through. So I've got a sequence here, got 33 photos in this one. If I just click through them really quickly, you can see how it moves around a bit. It wasn't very steady.
Right.
But hopefully we can fix that in Premiere Pro later on.
Are you panning intentionally, or is it just happening?
No, I was trying to hold it as still as possible, but not having a tripod, that was the best I could get. So, but the beauty of that is usually, like, without this effect in Premiere, you can't really use that. So it's kind of helps me to create these kind of clips where you wouldn't usually be able to do them otherwise. So it definitely saves a lot of footage.
Awesome.
I might just go through and give that a really quick edit, because this one's a little bit overexposed. You can see it's kind of very bright. The reason I did that was because I didn't have a filter on the camera, and I was trying to push the shutter a little bit more just to get, I think someone asked last week whether I look to get motion blur in some of these videos, and for something like this, I really wanted a bit of motion blur in the traffic. Being the middle of the day, I didn't have a filter for this particular lens to pop on, so I had to really push the shutter. ISO was 50. That's why it's a little bit bright.
And so you're taking that and you're like, well, I can fix that in post easier than adding in a blur. Is that the thought process?
Yeah, as long as I usually shoot a little bit underexposed, just because it's easier to save than if it's overexposed. You'll start to lose the brighter areas. So this one, you can see the sky, it looks like it's nearly been lost, but if I drag it back, you can actually see that it's in that raw file, it's still got enough data to bring back the sky there. So as long as you don't push it too much, especially with raw files, and that's why you always shoot in RAW if you can, because it gives you that little bit more data to save files if they're under or overexposed without adding in as much grain. With a JPEG file, or it's a lot harder to do that. You won't have as much data.
Nice.
Yeah, so I'm just going to, I guess, fix that up really quickly. With this one, I would have just, really kind of quickly adjusted the exposure, played around with the color a bit. I might go through and do that just really quickly, just to show you a quick before and after of what that would look like. So color, I'm usually adjusting as I went through last week. I usually use camera calibration a little bit to start with. Again, I've always got those lens corrections turned on. Tone curve, pretty simple. I'm just going to add those 3 points and then just play around with the midtones a little bit. Again, just adjust the shadows, which is that lower part of the curve, and the highlights. So just about there, nice kind of subtle adjustment. Come down to split tones. So again, split tones is where you're adding in, you can add in a little bit of color to your shadows and highlights. So I'm just going to add in a little bit of orange to this highlights and probably a little bit of blue to the shadows there.
Why orange and blue?
These are typically what I do for nearly every photo. It's just pretty consistent for me. I guess with your split tones, it is nice to know your complementary colors because they usually work well together for split tones. But you can do whatever you want there. You can, if you open it up here, you can kind of see what you're doing with your colors. I think using those pretty consistently, I guess, gives it a little bit more of a consistent feel with your work as well, but it's really up to you. You can play around with it a bit more if you like. But split tones for me, it's always pretty subtle. You can see like saturation, I've only got at 9. I don't like, it's just really subtle adjustments. Again, it's not too heavy. The most I would usually do is probably 10, 15 anyway. So it's not a dramatic change to the image. Like if I turn it on, you can see it's just kind of a slight change to the tone of the image. So usually color, I make more adjustments in calibration and obviously HSL. So for this one, I might just want to bump up the oranges a little bit, see if I can kind of bring out these orange lines and the cars a little bit. Just going to reduce the blues a little bit. Just going to come back up to basic and tweak this a little bit more. I'm just going to go through this quite quickly so then we can kind of open up in Premiere and play around. Again, because this one's quite bright at the top, I'd probably grab a gradient filter and just darken it a little bit from the top. And in the same way, I think just because I was shooting this through glass, you can see how it's really dark at the bottom.
Right.
So in the same way, I might just try and correct that a little bit with gradient filter and just adjust the exposure a bit, fix that up a little bit. And then, so detail, I think I spent a bit more time on last week, but this one again, I'm just going to sharpen it a little bit. So you're masking, again, just how much or which area you want to apply that kind of sharpening to. So that's really helpful. You can just sharpen parts of the image. Just noise reduction, again, depends on your ISO. So this one being at 50, there's not going to be much noise in it at all. So I don't really need to bump that up too much. I probably wouldn't even need to bump it up at all. And lastly, I might just put in a little bit of a vignette. I'd usually spend a little bit more time editing than this, but I thought I'd just run through a quick kind of before and after of how this kind of came to the final step.
And this is like part 2 of like a 2-part series, and we went through quite a lot last week of your thinking, and there was a lot of questions around it too. So if anyone's out there wanting more in depth, there is the video from part 1 that I'm sure Johanna will share in chat if you want to bookmark that and go back to it later to go into more detail.
If anyone has any questions on editing in Lightroom or any of these things that I'm doing pretty quickly, just jump in and can try and cover them as well. But yeah, that's a pretty, I guess, quick adjustment. This one, if I'm really trying to push the colors, I'll always push kind of vibrance over saturation, just because saturation, you start to get kind of colors kind of changing a little bit and leaking a little bit more. So it's always better if you want to push your colors a little bit to play around with the vibrance rather than pushing the saturation too much. Generally, saturation, I typically don't put past 0. If I do, it's only a very tiny bit, but usually it would be 0 or less if you're looking for kind of that desaturated kind of feel to your image. So vibrance is what I would do if I really want to kind of push the colors a bit more.
And there was a question, when do you know when you're done editing?
For me, I pretty much, I nearly go through every little tab here in Lightroom. So for me, I'm always checking kind of before and after as well. So you can kind of make sure you're headed in the right direction. The last thing you want to do is hit before and say, I think it actually looks better than what I've adjusted. So it's really handy just to keep hitting before and after to make sure you're headed in the right direction and you're happy with the image. For me, I guess the final stage is when I'm really happy with the colors, I guess, because the basic tone of the image I'd cover first, and then I'd spend a little bit more time tweaking colors until I'm kind of happy with that. So yeah, once I've gone through everything and colors are good, that's when I'm kind of happy with everything.
Cool.
So obviously that one, I've just edited one in the middle. The next step before I export this and start editing in Premiere Pro would just be to copy that across to the entire sequence. So just sync, make sure everything's ticked. I haven't cropped it, so I don't need to change anything there. And just copy those settings across.
And that just applies it to all of the images that you've got in the tray down the bottom.
Yep. In this folder, which is just this one sequence, it's going to apply them to every image. So now I go back to library, it's applied those to that sequence, and then I can export it ready to edit over in Premiere Pro. So again, when I edit, I just exported this one, so I'd name it whatever I want. I've got cars there, that's fine. And custom name sequence I would generally use for something like this, just so it names them cars 1, cars 2, cars 3. Just makes it easier when you're opening them up in Premiere Pro. So I'd go ahead and export that. Lucky I've already exported it, so we'll jump over to Premiere and start editing.
So there was another question from Mal. I have a question. Are night photos better or more difficult to edit?
I guess it just totally depends on the scene and what you like editing, I guess. In general, I guess if the light's a bit better, it may be slightly easier to edit because you might not have as much noise if you're not shooting with a higher ISO. But again, it depends whether you're shooting on tripod and things as well. So it really just depends. If you shoot a lot of night photography, you might find it a lot easier because that's what you're used to. But I generally like a bit of blue sky somewhere in the image, which is always nice to play around with some blues. So yeah, but it doesn't matter too much. But yeah, good question. So in Premiere, the first thing I want to do is obviously import sequence. I guess for anyone that's not real familiar with Premiere before I get started on this, there is, I guess, the biggest confusing thing when you open up Premiere Pro, if you haven't used it before, there's a bit going on. There's different kind of tabs everywhere and different views and different windows. You can view it in different ways. There's different workspaces, or you can kind of create your own. If ever you're looking for something and you can't find it, just come up to window and make sure the box is ticked. So later on, I'm going to go through some effects. If I couldn't find that, for example, just make sure you go up to window and you should be able to find it there and make sure it's ticked, and then it should appear somewhere on your window. It's pretty easy, but I guess that's one thing when you open up Premiere, if you haven't used it before, can be a little bit confusing.
Yeah, for sure. It's Premiere, and same with After Effects. I think the menus, really do overwhelm people. They're like, well, I don't know what all this stuff does, but more often than not, you don't need everything. You can really kind of drill down. You only actually need a few things. And I think,
I think that's a good thing about Premiere. You can keep it really simple. You can do really simple editing, but you've got capacity to kind of endless different effects and different tools and stuff that you've got access to as you start learning. So it's really good in that way. So import down here in project, I'm just going to double click, come back to wherever I exported this, which was just that cars folder. Again, I'm just going to select that first one. If I come down to options and just make sure image sequence is selected, it's going to import that entire sequence and it's going to be there as a video file. So if I play that back, you can see it's not real stable. It's not too bad, but it definitely moves around a bit. And depending, let's bring that over to the timeline and see if we can fix it. So again, if I play that back, the first half of it moves around quite a bit. The second half's actually pretty good. So depending on how good of a job Warp Stabilizer does, I may even need to cut this clip in half. Some things aren't savable if you've got a lot of camera shake. This one, for instance, if Warp Stabilizer doesn't work on the whole clip, I may need to cut it, say about there, and just use the second half, because I'm sure it will be able to stabilize that second bit. But let's see how we go. So I'll come over to effects and I'm just going to search for Warp Stabilizer. So this is really good for even normal video footage. If you've shot it handheld, you can usually stabilize it a little bit using Warp Stabilizer as well. You've got a couple of different options when you use it. So I'm just going to drag that over to the clip. And it will take a little bit of time to do that. You can see here if I open up effects controls, I've got Warp Stabilizer added in there, and it's just analyzing the clip. And you've got a couple of options here. You can go smooth motion. So if you've got a clip that's moving, that's going to help smooth it out. For something like this where I want no motion, I'm obviously going to come down and I'm going to select no motion. And let's just see if that's been able to stabilize it, which it's done a pretty good job. It looks pretty steady to me. So just like that, just from dragging one simple effect, I've gone from this kind of clip that I can't really do much with. I probably wouldn't want to share that anywhere because it's so wobbly. But already just from applying that, I can definitely create something with this little clip just from dragging one simple effect on.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. Warp Stabilizer, I think we talked about it a little bit last time. It's like your favorite things, like a magic little button. Yeah,
and obviously it has limitations. You can't have and that's why even that first bit, I wasn't sure. Sometimes if you're too shaky, or for instance, shooting a handheld sequence like this, if I held it for long enough, it would just shake too much. I wouldn't be able to fix it. That's why it's like just a nice short clip that I've shot here in burst mode. So the next thing I'd want to do with this clip, just to make it a little bit longer and make it repeat, I'm going to double it up. But before I do, just so whenever you apply Warp Stabilizer to anything, it's a really good habit just to nest the clip. So all that nesting does is it basically resets the clip with all the settings that you've already applied to it. So it's like creating a fresh layer in Photoshop of everything you've already done. So you can then go and apply more effects to it. The thing with Warp Stabilizer, because it has to analyze that clip, if you go and change it, it's not going to be able to stabilize it. After you nest it, I've got that essentially a new clip there already stabilized. So it's handy to do that. I can then, for instance, double that clip. So duplicating clips in Premiere is really easy. If you hold Option and then just drag, Option or Alt for Windows users, you just drag it over and it's going to create a duplicate if you hold that down when you do it. So for this one, I'm just going to go into speed duration, which is where you can also reverse the clip. I'm going to leave the speed, but I'm just going to reverse that second one. And if I play that back, I've just got a nice, like I said, it's like a boomerang going back and forth.
Right.
So for this, when I kind of,
I was going to say, does that work? I mean, that obviously works really well with traffic, and you've got the motion blur, so you can't really tell that when it's going backwards and forwards, like that kind of mind trick. Like if you see a train doing that and you look at it for long enough, it looks like it's going one way and the other way simultaneously, like depending on how your mind's interpreting it. Is it like, does it always work, or are there certain things that it won't work with?
Some clips, and it's like, especially for something like Instagram, if I'm wanting to do a loop, there's a couple of different ways. Sometimes like this one, I might just reverse it, which isn't obviously a continual loop. Or you could, if that didn't work as well, it really depends on the clip and what's moving. You could just cut that, drag it over, and just create kind of a normal loop as well. So it depends a little bit on the clip, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah. Cool.
So for this one, the next thing I'd essentially do is go and change. If I wanted to, say, post this to Instagram, which when I originally edited this one I did, I would go up to sequence. I'd probably just nest that as one clip to start with. Then if I want to go and make changes later on, it's just to one clip. I just go to sequence settings and just change it to pretty much any 4:5 ratio, if that's what I was going for.
That's like the Instagram tile standard ratio, right?
Yeah, especially for this that I've shot in vertical, to make sure it shows as big as possible. And then I'd go through and that's pretty much ready to post to Instagram once I've cropped it to size and exported. Occasionally, depending on the clip, I'll add some audio as well. So for that one, I might add some traffic sounds, just some simple, or if you wanted to add music, whatever it was. So I might go through kind of another one of these really quickly and just show how I've kind of looped it as well. Actually, let's go through. I was going to go through this hyperlapse clip as well.
Cool. Just had a couple of questions just before, as we're going into there. Johanna's asking, what is the worst footage you've ever had to stabilize? Was it beyond saving?
There is, especially when you're shooting hyperlapses, which I'm going to go into this next one. So you're shooting handheld and basically taking a shot. Well, there's a couple of different ways to do it, but that's generally how I'll do it. Take a step, take a shot, take a step, take a shot, trying to line it up as best as possible. So it's just a moving time lapse essentially. Some of those you just can't save if it's too wobbly. You can apply a few rounds of warp stabilizer and do your best, but even really shaky video footage, if you try and stabilize it and it's too shaky, it's just going to look really warped, and you've probably seen how that looks. It just doesn't work. So I've had some footage that's definitely unsavable.
Cool.
And this next one that I'll show you, you can see like at the end here, it's a little bit shaky. It's not perfect. It was nearly unsavable. I'll show you in a sec. And that's why it's a good example for hyperlapses.
What is the distinction, like the actual difference between time-lapse and hyperlapse?
For me, if I had to like give a definition, and it's hard because it's basically whether the camera is moving or not. So for a time-lapse, usually stationary, you can still take a time-lapse, say on a slider, and it's still moving, and I'd still call that a time-lapse. But I guess a hyperlapse is where there's a lot of movement. So if you're walking, I would still generally call it a hyperlapse if you're on a moving vehicle, and even though you're still, the camera's moving.
Right.
So I'd still call something like that a hyperlapse, but technically I'm not sure if, it may not be, but that's anything where there's a significant amount of camera movement, I'd call a hyperlapse.
Oh, cool. I like it.
So this one, I'm just going to add in. I'll show you the sequence that I had in Lightroom. So for this one, you can see if I scroll through it, how shaky it is from one frame to the next. So that's why it was nearly unsavable. This isn't probably one of my better hyperlapses. It really depends. You can see, especially towards the end, I must have got a bit tired, so it's a bit more shaky.
Have you ever used like a gimbal or anything like that to try to stabilize it?
Yeah, so gimbals, depending on what it is, if it's really straight, like something like this, and you're just walking down like a straight line, straight up to something, gimbal can work really well. If you're trying to move up to something and say pan up or move around something, it's a little bit trickier with a gimbal, but you can still do it.
Right.
The advantage of, say, this type of handheld one, as you get closer to something, if you've picked a point to steady against, as you move in, you're also going to pan up to it as you get closer. So it's creates a nice effect as well.
Yeah, I love that. Almost like a parallax-like effect as you're getting closer. I don't know if it's technically called a parallax effect when it's like this, but that depth, that really quick depth, is like really engaging and also like super interesting.
Yeah, and that's why they're really easy to do. Shoot, obviously handheld, you don't need to carry the gimbal around with you, so it's a bit easier to shoot as well. I guess the challenge is making it as steady as possible. It's never going to be perfect, but then hopefully you can save it in Premiere if it's smooth enough. So this one was about 189 photos. So as I said, just take a step, take a photo, take a step, take a photo. I would have probably used a point on the grid for this one. So just as an example, like you might have picked, I'm looking through the viewfinder at a point on the grid on my viewfinder, tried to line it up as best as possible with probably a point on the cathedral. So then every step you take, you're lining it up at that same point. And that's how you get it as smooth as possible.
Cool.
So again, I'd export that in exactly the same way. And then I would open it up in Premiere Pro in the same way again. So make sure my sequence is selected. Again, I'll just play the video file back for you so you can see how shaky it actually is. And that's why even this one, you'd think maybe that won't be savable, but let's give it a go. So I'll drag that over to my timeline. If I can click on it properly. So first thing I want to do, obviously, same again, I'm just going to drag warp stabilizer over, and it'll take a little bit of time to analyze that. I've exported these a little bit smaller. So usually, obviously, because it's analyzing each frame, it can take a bit of time, especially if they're larger files. For these ones, I've made them a little bit smaller, so it'll be a little bit quicker, but it's worth the time that it takes for sure.
And you shooting in RAW, obviously, because you're bringing everything into Lightroom to kind of edit and color grade and all that sort of stuff. But then when you bring them into Premiere Pro, are they coming in as JPEGs?
Yeah, so I've exported them from Lightroom. When I finish editing that sequence, I'll export the entire sequence just as pretty large JPEG files, because then I've got a bit of room to play around with in Premiere. I can zoom in, or you can also kind of process them, and you can process the RAWs through After Effects as well. I generally do it this way because I'm editing in Premiere Pro anyway, like the final steps. I'm already editing them in Lightroom as well. I'll just export them as JPEG and then do warp stabilizer in Premiere, which you can do obviously in After Effects as well.
Right. Yeah. Cool. And just with rendering time and like dealing with these large files, do you find that you need to like invest in like crazy technology? Like, do you have to have a really beefy computer for this, or does it just take a little bit longer if you have, a less powerful machine?
It will take a little bit longer, especially things like if you've shot like a really long day to night time lapse where you've got, could be over 1,000 photos in some instances. To export that, to edit that, to render it, it is going to take time. So the faster your machine is, the better. But obviously you can still do it on a slower machine. It's just going to take you a lot longer.
Yeah. Will you often take like a laptop with you and do things on the fly, or do you usually focus on shooting, getting as much content as you can? Like I guess I'm thinking about when you're traveling more so than when you're in your own town, and then bringing everything back and going, all right, what do I got? What am I going to do with this? Or do you do everything on the fly? What's your workflow? So
traveling, I generally, depending on what it's for, if it's personal travel, I'll generally still edit a bit. Sometimes I might have stuff due if it's a project or something. So I'll definitely be editing on the go, editing that night if need be, editing on trains or flights or wherever you get a bit of a chance to edit. even if it's more of a personal trip where I'll still be shooting a lot, I'll generally still back up all my files that night. Usually I'll have 2 hard drives and back up a couple of copies to each. And I'm a bit pretty careful. Usually I'll put them in different locations. So I might put one in my suitcase or one in my backpack, just so if anything happens, I've still got a backup there ready to go.
Nice.
But yeah, it just depends on a trip. Usually if I'm really excited to edit something, I might want to jump in and edit it straight away, even if I don't need to. But yeah, depends on the trip.
Cool.
Yeah. So jump back in. That's kind of finished analyzing. For this one, because it's moving, I don't want to select no motion, so I'm going to keep smooth motion. It automatically starts on 50, but for some that's going to be a problem. If I play that back, I'll show you what I mean. So really stable to start with. It's done a good job. But as I got a bit shaky, you can see how it freaks out a bit.
Oh, right. Yeah.
See how that just kind of warping all over the place? So when you apply warp stabilizer to a clip like this, it's better to go really subtle. So let's just go, 10%. And that'll stabilize again. If I play that back, the start's really smooth. But again, where I start to tire, you can see it gets a little bit shaky. But it's done a reasonable job. It's just that last bit still a little bit shaky. So that's why you're better to go subtle. If it's trying to apply too much and the clip's moving around, it is just going to warp all over the place. So generally you're better to go a really small percentage and just let it make a kind of subtle adjustment. If you're still after a little bit more of stabilization, the best way to do that is to nest that clip. So again, you're kind of starting from scratch and then actually drag a second one across. And again, have that at about 10%. So you're applying a couple of rounds rather than applying larger amount.
Right. So like you might do 2 lots of 10% rather than doing 20%.
Yeah, just because.
Yeah.
Yeah, the higher you put it, it will start to warp it a little bit if it's too shaky. So I guess there's nothing you could go and do that several times on, say, 10%, and it's going to do a lot better job than if you put it up too high if it's really shaky. Again, it's not going to be perfect if you haven't done a really good job at shooting it. This one, for instance, I'll let that finish, but the first bit you can see it was quite smooth. It had done a really good job. It's just that second bit was a little bit shaky.
Yeah.
So that shouldn't take too much longer.
And I should mention as well, we've had some new people join since we've started. So the chat that we're using, if you guys do have questions, is over at behance.net/live, and just jump on in there and ask your questions as we're going along. If you're on YouTube or anywhere else watching this.
Cool. So I might just, before we play that back, I'll just show you, let's just go back to what it originally looked like, which is very shaky.
Did you get this in one shot? Like what happens if you get someone like doing the Bittersweet Symphony like in their head, just like, you know, beelining for you, and you're like, dude, I got a camera, like, come on. Like, do you have to do a couple of shots? Yeah, it happens,
and it's... The problem with doing a hyperlapse like this, not many people understand what you're doing.
Right.
They probably think you're a bit weird because you're literally holding a camera up. I'm always looking through the viewfinder, taking a step, take a photo, take a step, take a photo.
Yeah.
So if people get in your way, you just have to stop and probably start again. But sometimes as you get a little bit closer, they might realize what you're doing and jump out of your way, but definitely not always.
Yep.
So let's go play that back. So I've applied 2 rounds of warp stabilizer there, and you can see it's done a reasonable job now. Even it still just loses a little bit at the end there. So you could even cut that clip just to there if I wanted to. It depends how much that little bit of movement was bothering you. Or again, of course, I could nest that and apply a 3rd round if I wanted to and see if that helped. But I'm just going to nest it anyway. I won't apply another round. The last thing I wanted to do on this clip, again, I might just crop it in. So this one I posted to Instagram. So again, I'm just going to change that to a 4:5 ratio. And then because I've nested it, I can just zoom in a little bit. Oops, I've done that in the wrong direction. So I'll zoom in a little bit. Now, to create kind of a dolly zoom on this, obviously it's not got to be perfect, but in post you can have the same effect. If I go to the start of the clip and zoom in a long way, and then go to the end of the clip, it's a really handy shortcut in Premiere. If you want to go to the start or the end of any of your clips that you selected, just hitting Shift and End will go to the end of the clip, or if I hit Shift and Home, it'll go back to the start of the clip. So that's one I use all the time. So I need to create some keyframes. So scale, I'm just going to keyframe that first sequence, go back to the end of the sequence and zoom back out as much as I can that it keeps it in frame. And then if I play that back, I've got a bit of a dolly zoom effect as it stabilizes in.
That's awesome.
So for this one, I think once I'd done this with the original one that I edited, I nested that again and then did a third layer of warp stabilization just because it's still a little bit shaky. You can see it's pretty good, but it's not perfect. So you can keep doing that a few times, but eventually it's just going to not have too much of an effect.
Right.
And for this one, I'd probably speed it up a little bit. It just feels a little bit slow. So maybe I'll go speed duration again. Yeah, speed duration, and you can make it a little bit faster. So let's just go 200 to see what that looks like. And probably that speed I'm a little bit happier with. The last thing I do with this clip, again, similar to that last one, I'm just going to hit Option and drag over to duplicate the clip. And the second one, back to speed duration. Again, I'm going to reverse it, but this time I'm going to make it a lot faster. So let's go 400%. And if I play that back, you're going to have going in and then really quickly back to the start.
Right.
And that's pretty much what my final clip would have looked like when I was posting that one. So again, I think I'd apply another round just to smoothen it out a bit, but other than that, that's ready to go. You could apply some audio to it again. I think for this one, I just had some footsteps and harbor ambience,
right,
just to create, I guess, gives it another layer.
That's super cool. Like, yeah, I absolutely love the hyperlapse thing. Like, when I was thinking about how you would have done that, I would have assumed you would have had something like fairly stationary, like a dolly or something like that, and then you were like changing the focus, like not the focus, that like the depth as you were going, which starts to get really complicated. Like you're trying to take a step and then changing, and then taking a step and changing. But it's pretty amazing. Like you could do that in we did that in like 15 minutes. Like you probably do it in 5 when you're not talking and explaining what you're doing as well.
Yeah, like nothing I've done there has been very complicated. It's quite easy to do. And of course, it's not as if you're doing it when you shoot, you get a much nicer dolly zoom effect. But you can do the same thing, and you can do it with drone footage as well. So as you're flying forward, you can kind of have that same effect, and even just creating that in post, you still get a nice effect.
Yeah, it's super cool. I love that one.
Yeah, so that's, I guess, hyperlapses. That's generally how I'll shoot pretty much all my hyperlapses, mostly handheld. Again, if you're just trying to pop a short clip into a video, you can shoot a video clip and speed it up as well. But again, you're not going to get that motion blur. That's probably the quickest way to do it though.
Yeah.
So the last one, I might just quickly go through, again, a pretty simple edit, but just show you how I ended up with.
Oh, cool. Where's this shot?
So this is the Shard, which is on the river in London. Nice foggy morning in London. So it's pretty simple time lapse, but again, just to make it, I guess, a tiny little bit more interesting, some of the effects that I just copied this to my desktop, so I'll just find it. So again, if I jump back to Lightroom, where are we? I'll just find where I saved this one. So Shard time-lapse, I just put it in a collection there. So it's on a hard drive that I don't have plugged in, but you can see I've got 900 photos in this one, so it was a big long one. The reason I kept it so long was to try and wait till the fog cleared. But I'll show you what I've got here. So this is that sequence exported. I've saved it just so I can edit it again in Lightroom. Again, exporting those all as JPEGs so I can then edit them in Premiere Pro. Making sure, again, drag in that whole sequence. And this one obviously being shot on a time lapse. Thankfully, I don't have to stabilize. It's all ready to go. Even on its own, like just as that, it's quite a nice clip with the fog. But if you're wanting to use that just on its own, it would look good in a complete video piece with other footage. But if you're just trying to use that on its own, you can make it a little bit more interesting as well. So I'll just go through and I guess how I would achieve that. So drag it over to the timeline. For this one, all I would probably do is just create some keyframes so you're getting a bit of a zoom in. Again, depending on how you shoot, if you've got some fancy equipment like a slider, you can set it up so your camera is actually moving or moving in or panning across as the time lapse shoots, which creates a really nice effect. But again, it's a lot more equipment and a lot more expensive. So you can create, again, it's not as good, but you can still create similar effects in post when you're editing time lapses as well. So this one, I'm just going to start a keyframe. So again, for your keyframes, make sure you got effect controls open, and scale and position is the two things I'm going to move around. For this one, I might want to start it kind of nice and zoomed in on the building, on the Shard, and then maybe just come across a little bit in the clip. All I'm doing here to go across 5 frames at a time is hitting Shift as I go across, which will jump across 5 frames at a time rather than just one at a time.
So just Shift and pressing across on the keyboard, right?
Yep. So usually for something like this, for a quick zoom in or out, I would want at least 10 frames. For that, I've gone a little bit more. So it's not super quick, but it'll still kind of just slowly zoom out. And I've just added 2 keyframes so far, but you can see I've already just got a nice effect just zooming out from that. From there, I would probably add in some more just so it's got a really slow zoom in for the rest of the clip. So maybe come to about there and just zoom in a little bit, perhaps about there. So if I play that back, I've got kind of really fast zoom out, and then it's just slowly zooming in for the rest of the clip.
It's a really cool effect.
So again, super simple to do, and it just adds, I guess, another dimension to a still time lapse. Makes it a little bit more interesting.
Yeah, for sure. And do you ever, like, a question from Johanna, in terms of equipment, what would you recommend as a beginner's first big money investment? We're talking a lot about equipment and stuff like that before, like a nicer camera or a more powerful computer, lenses, something else entirely.
Sometimes lenses, but cameras probably camera and lenses are the main ones for me. Like, it depends. Like if you're trying to shoot more time lapse, for example, you can use most cameras, and you can make time lapse with most cameras. You can even shoot time lapses on your phone. So it doesn't matter too much where you start. If it's something that you want to get into, you don't need to have a big budget to start. Most cameras, even if you don't have an inbuilt time-lapse like intravolometer setting, you can attach an external one, which you just attach to your camera, so it triggers the shutter to shoot every 2 seconds, every second, whatever you want it to do. So I guess the main thing, just experiment, and if you whatever camera you have is the best camera in my opinion, because you can get out and use it, and then if it's something you like doing, then you can eventually upgrade when you're ready.
Have you ever taken a photo like on your phone, like kind of, I just take a photo on my phone and gone, actually that's like there's something about this that I really like, I'm going to try and like not salvage it, I suppose, but you're like, actually this is like it's a good shot or a good angle or a good something about this is working for me, and then you've kind of taken it and you're trying to push it as far as you can? Or is there no mobile photography that really makes the cut compared to like a proper DSLR setup planned shoot?
With cameras, I mean, phones the way they are now, they're getting better and better. I mean, there's some circumstances where I'd still want a DSLR or my mirrorless camera to shoot, but in some instances, phones, it's not nearly as good, but they're getting so much better. The quality is pretty amazing. You can do so much just with a phone. So it really depends. But even time-lapse modes you can create, you can even do it yourself. I've shot time-lapses on a phone. A lot you can download apps and different things, and it will create the video automatically, because usually I want to edit the photos and then export and open it up and process it myself. Even on a phone, you could just press the shutter. You can just press every 2 seconds or every second on the phone. And a lot of phones shoot RAW as well. So I've done that where I just shot a really short sequence, just pressing the shutter, which you can get apps for. But for this one, I just clicked and then opened it up, edited the RAWs, exported them, and shot a time lapse that way. So you can definitely use your phone as well. So there's no kind of limitation there as well.
Nice. Yeah, nice.
So this one, the other thing, I guess, if I was just posting that single clip to say something like Instagram, again, I'd probably loop that. So I'm just gonna get rid of some of those keyframes, because I do this first usually, and all I would do to loop that is cut the clip somewhere. So maybe I just cut it near the start, drag that front bit so it overlaps and sitting on top of the end of the clip. Essentially that means that where that clip ends, it's going to start back at the beginning.
Right.
And then you just need to kind of account for this bit where you'll be able to see the clouds very different. And the easiest way to do that is just your cross dissolve. So this is, I think I said this last week, it's the easiest way to loop a sequence like this. You can see now it kind of blends in. You can't really see.
Right.
Cloud becomes a lot thicker, but it's really not noticeable to your eye.
It's not like a jarring like stop, which you can tell like interrupts a perfect loop.
Yeah, exactly. So that's really simple way to, especially time-lapse clips. Most time-lapse clips, unless the sky and the cloud's very different, sometimes it won't work as well, but that's pretty easy way to loop any of your clips. If you're looking for a bit of a loop for something like Instagram or anything, if I double that over, so again, hit Option and just line them up. If I play that back, you can tell there a little bit with the cloud, but at that point it's playing back super smooth. So essentially you've got a loop there. And then as I went through, I would just nest that again and then kind of create those keyframes on this clip. So maybe zoom in, jump across like I did before, zoom out, maybe bring it up a little bit, zoom in a little bit. And again, just so it ends on the same point, I would make sure, just going to duplicate those again. So Same with your keyframes. If you hit Option or Alt, you can actually duplicate the keyframes as well. So that means it's going to be exactly the same as that point. And that just means that it finishes here. It's going to finish at the same point that it starts. So there it zooms out, slowly zooms in, and then it's going to zoom into that final point. And if I double it over, you've got your loop.
Nice.
So again, for that, I'd go in, add a bit of audio. I might add in some sounds. Probably for this one, again, near the harbor, you might have like some seagulls or something kind of in the background chirping, just to give it a bit more of a feel as well. And that's how I would kind of edit it. Generally, like, it's, as I said, it's a nice clip on its own, but it just makes it a little bit more interesting once you create a loop out of it, and you've also got a bit of a zoom in and zoom out effect.
How important is like music, adding music and like sound effects and things like that?
For me, like, sound is like, for any video, it's hugely important. Whether it's time lapse or an actual video, your audio is super important. So I like to, even if it's a really short clip, like say one of those looping clips that's only a few seconds long, usually I would like some kind of background noise or ambience or something that matches the clip a little bit. I think it just makes it so much more engaging or interesting having a bit of audio. Music helps as well. Like a lot of time that'll be music, but even if I add music, generally I'll often add in some kind of background noise or ambience as well, just so it kind of matches the scene a little bit.
Yeah, cool.
So I guess the challenge when you start adding in audio, especially if you're trying to loop a clip, it's a little bit harder because you don't want it to be super obvious where the audio stops and starts as well. So then I usually use different effects, like just fading it in or fading it out, just to make it a little bit less obvious. Sometimes you just need to find the right point in the clip where it will be looping already, but it's a little bit more challenging than sometimes looping your footage.
Yeah. And do you have like a go-to place to get sound? Because audio can be very tricky, like with copyright and all that sort of stuff. Like you don't want to get flagged on YouTube or on Instagram or any platform really. Yeah,
and that's why I've got a subscription with Epidemic Sound, so I just use all their music, and they've got sound effects as well as sound. So I've got a subscription there. I guess when I started out, I kind of just looked for copyright-free music.
Yeah.
But now, as I'm doing a lot more that I need, obviously, licensing for, if you've got a subscription or something, it just makes it a lot easier. You don't have to stress or worry about. It's a bit easy. You just go to one place to find it. And obviously it can be a little bit limiting if you can't find songs you like, and you might have to spend a bit of time going through and listening and finding tracks that you want to use. But at least you don't have to worry about copyright or where you can use it, or where you can, if someone wants to purchase it or whatever it may be.
Yeah. Yeah. And I was thinking about when you were showing this last one, I'll just go back to your screen so we can see it again. It's like down on the docks. Like, do you ever just like record anything, like either on your phone or anything, or you don't have much success? Like there's a difference between what it actually sounds like there probably to what like I don't know, like the sound that you're going for, like seagulls and a little bit of ocean or sea washing up on the shore.
To be honest, I guess saying that, I probably should record a little bit more, because sometimes that's obviously it works a lot better. Generally, it's not a habit I'm in a good habit of remembering to get some audio when I'm somewhere, but it would be a good habit for something like this. It would be great, a bit of ambience. So yeah, it's definitely a good idea, but not something I practice.
Yeah. Yeah, cool.
Yeah.
So we probably have a couple of minutes for some more questions, chat. So if you guys have some questions, I'm just going to go through because there was a couple I may have missed as well.
Yep. I've got like a similar example, but this one's quite similar to what I did. So depending on how we're going for time, I can kind of go through that, or we'll see if there's any questions.
Yeah, well, I mean, as the questions can come through, let's jump into another one. So this was one at the museum. I think there was actually questions around that. This museum photo, Festus was asking this question before, so I was going to wait until we got to it. Thinking of this museum photo, when you were leaning over the railing to get the staircase, okay, it's the other one, but whatever. Any special things you use to prevent dropping your camera from a great height?
I generally trust myself pretty. Sometimes you might have it around your neck, but generally I trust myself. I'm holding it pretty firmly. It would, even if someone bumped me, they nearly have to bump me over if I was going to drop it. So I'm holding it pretty steady. Sometimes like I might have the wrist strap around as well. It depends on the camera whether I have that or the longer strap on.
Yeah.
But I guess it is a good habit to either put it around your neck or have it on your wrist. If anything happens, it's there. But for something like that one, I felt pretty secure doing it.
You've obviously never had any like horrible experiences dropping anything from a great height, knock on wood.
Touch wood. The only problem I've ever had dropping any camera gear was kind of like side access bag, like a lot of cameras are. It wasn't zipped up, and I threw it onto my back, and it was just a hardwood floor, and camera fell out. The lens that was attached hit the ground first, so it kind of broke off, and the ring was still attached to the camera. So that's the only droppage story that I have, and I was able to fix the lens, but it never quite focused as well as it should after that. So thankfully I don't, touch wood, have any more stories. So if I jump back in, I'll just show you what these files looked like before, just as the photo. So I'll just before and after, jump across to develop. Not a huge change there, but I've just changed the color a little bit. This one was about 28 photos. So again, didn't have to hold the camera there for a lot. If I slide across, you can see there's a little bit of shake there. But in the same way, if I open that up in Premiere, I'll just use this same one. I'll just get rid of all of this and start from scratch. So let's just find where I've saved this again on the desktop, so easy access. Again, just make sure I've got image sequence selected, and it'll bring in.
I noticed that you organized it by name just then. Do you have to do that when you import it?
Generally, I use dates. So just because some of these were on different hard drives and saved in different locations, and I didn't want too much plugged in here, I've just saved them all to my desktop to edit now. But generally on the hard drive, they're saved date. So it might be 2020, month, day, and then a name. So I can organize them first by date, and then just a name to identify it. So that time-lapse of the shard in London, it might have just been fog time-lapse shard at the end of the date as well.
Right.
But yeah, these ones that I've saved on the desktop, you see some interesting names like MUS for museum, just
like
because I quickly
for yourself.
Yeah, I just quickly saved it on the desktop, so they were there ready to go. So, but yeah, good habit. Like having some kind of system, it makes a huge difference for like your catalogs in Lightroom. It makes a big difference for your hard drives and finding footage. It's definitely a good habit to get into if you can have some kind of system. It probably doesn't matter too much what your system is, as long as it's easy to find your footage if you need to track it down or identify different folders.
Yeah.
So again, this one, if I play it back, there's not a lot of shake there, fortunately, because I was leaning up against the rail on this one. it's pretty steady. Again, it helps if you've got some kind of inbuilt stabilization, like in the lens or in your camera. For this one, I had it on the lens, and that just meant I could, even though it's shaking a little bit, I'm still getting a little bit of motion blur. I was able to push the shutter a little bit more than if I didn't have that image stabilization on. And this one, because there's not much shake there, like I know in the same way, just chucking on warp stabilizer and it's going to be nice and smooth. It shouldn't have any problems stabilizing that one. Again, because it's still, I just want to put no motion on this one. Because these are I exported this as a full-size JPEG and I've got a few apps running. It's taking a little bit longer to do that, but the final result, obviously, for that one stabilizing was pretty straightforward. It's just stabilized that. Once that finished, I'll show you in exactly the same way. I was able to loop it. And because it's such a short clip, like I only shot as I said, it was only like 28 photos. So that's, if you're about 24 frames per second, you've only got about a second worth of footage. So I really needed to loop it and make it a little bit longer. Depends on the clip, something like that, because you've got the people moving. Having a nice looping clip like that, a little cinematograph, for me, it's a bit more interesting than if I just shot like that. Still a nice angle. I still like that shot on its own if it wasn't moving, but it's just a little bit more interesting, and it's not really that hard to do. Like I literally just held my camera there and just held the shutter down. So you don't even need something like an intervalometer or your interval checking. You just need a camera that can shoot at a reasonably fast frame rate, and because it's writing a lot of shots really quickly, you need a pretty fast memory card as well, just so it can keep up. But yeah, I literally just held it down in a burst mode, so it just kept shooting at a constant rate until the card probably stopped buffering and couldn't handle the buffer.
Oh, really? I never really thought of like having to invest in like really fast, or like, I guess, really thought that much about like SD cards or anything like that, but that does make a big difference. Especially
like for video, and if you're shooting 4K or even higher now, some of the cameras that you can use, you're going to need a pretty quick write speed. Generally for photos, you're going to be okay unless you're trying to shoot a really fast burst of photos in a row, like holding the shutter down. And again, it depends on the camera. It depends on kind of the sensor size, so how big those files are going to be, right, and also how quickly it can shoot one photo after the other. But for most, if you've got a slow memory card, it's going to be that stops you before the camera.
Right.
So that one's stabilized. All I would do again to loop that, super simple, just cut a little bit in exactly the same way and cross dissolve. Really easy to do. And this one, you can kind of see where people fade in and out, but essentially you've got a loop there just from doing that. And I just doubled that over quite a few times to get that final clip there.
And what do you export it as? I suppose it matters where you're exporting it, but let's say it was Instagram or something. What are you exporting the file as? Because I assume you have to think about length and size and things like that. You have to worry about compression.
Yeah.
Sorry, too many questions at once.
I guess the thing for something like Instagram, you're going to get a bit of compression regardless with video. So I generally try not to I don't want the files too big, but generally I just go, like when I export, I would generally just export it as one of the presets, and I just do high bitrate. So I just go what it's on there, H.264, because I want to keep kind of the sequence settings, I would have already, this one I haven't, but I already cropped the sequence to whatever ratio I wanted to post it. Say it was 4:5. I would just go match source, high bitrate, so it keeps whatever I set that as. And then sometimes I'll tick this as well, just use maximum render quality. So then it will just use whatever file size it's got there to keep it within that kind of quality.
Yeah.
So pretty simple. Depends where you're uploading to. Obviously, in Premiere, you've got lots of different presets that you can use. If you're just using mobile, you can like use mobile 4K. For YouTube, you've got all your different settings there, which generally I'll use if I'm doing like 4K YouTube video. I'll just use those presets there. For most things though, I'll just kind of match the source unless I need to go through and change it.
Cool.
Yeah, so pretty simple, and like it's a bit limiting, but it's in the same way. I've got heaps of different clips like this, which are exactly the same in the way you'd edit them. They're really easy to edit. You're just exporting kind of a burst sequence from Lightroom and stabilizing it in Premiere. So they're really easy to do. But again, shooting here, I was just trying to think of something different that I could do. It's nice if you can get a really clean staircase, but it was quite busy obviously when we were there. So that was out of the question. I thought, well, there's lots of people moving down the stairs. It might look interesting if I can get a time lapse, but I can't use a tripod. So I guess this is kind of the next best thing that you can still do when you can use things like warp stabilizer and kind of save some of your footage.
Yeah, totally.
Again, that the original clip, it's probably a second or less. It's just looped over a number of times. So
looped around.
Yeah.
How many times how long would it take to get a shot like that? Like, do you usually find that you'll get it first time around and you're like, oh, that was easy, and then you move along and you take like 20 and you kind of drill down to the best one? Or do you find that you'll be standing there and you're like, hey, I think this is the shot, and then you'll spend, like, I guess I'm just thinking about investment of time in a space like that, like, and you're like, no, I really want to get this, and you try it a bunch of times? Or what's the thought process with that?
For something like this one, these two, like I took a couple of different ones in different spots in terms of these short little clips where I was shooting a burst. Generally, I would just review it and make sure it's not shaking too much. If, for instance, say I lined it up and then the staircase was really bare and there wasn't enough people, I may have done it again just so it was a little bit more interesting. But for something like that, I don't really have to shoot too many times. So depends on, if I review it and it looks a little bit more shaky, I might try and be a little bit more stable and shoot it again.
Yeah.
Just so I know I can save it But I guess that's the beauty of shooting those little clips. Lots of places you can't take a tripod, you might forget your tripod. I've seen kind of cool effects with people as well. So you could just shoot a burst, like you're shooting a portrait, but shoot a burst kind of just moving around someone. So it'll actually, the person, like the angle will change in the portrait, and edit that in a similar way and just stabilize it. You've got an interesting kind of clip or cinematograph as well. So there's lots of different things you can try and play around with those type of effects. Yeah,
cool. Do you have one of those like online, like or on your Instagram that we could have a look at, or on your website?
I have done a portrait one, but I'm not sure if I'll just double check. I'm not sure if can't remember sharing it, just because I don't share a lot of portraits on. So this one's similar in a way, which I did for Huawei, the phone company.
Oh wow!
But it was shot in exactly the same way. The only difference with something like this, the phone, of course, was on a little bit of string, which I had to edit out in post. And that's why I wanted to shoot photos rather than try and create this from a video clip. In exactly the same way, I just shot a burst. So I was holding down the shutter. It's taking photos as quickly as it could until I had at least a full revolution of the phone. And then again, it's just looped.
Yeah. Is the phone and the hand like all shot in the same location, or is it shot like with a white backdrop and you've cut it out? Or
so what I did with this one, I shot it all at this one spot. As I said, like I use a photo because then you can use Photoshop and individually edit each frame. And because I've only shot one revolution of the phone, there was only like 20 photos there that I had to go and edit out a little bit from like the string. The hand might have moved a little bit. So what I did was basically, the great thing about Premiere as well, you can use a Photoshop file to overlay. So say I had some weird movement happening through the top of this sequence for any reason, but I still wanted the people to move there. I could just open up one of those individual photos in Photoshop, erase, say, the bottom half of the photo and have that clear. And then I would just get the movement in the bottom of the frame. So for something like this one, all I did was create an overlay of the hand and an overlay of the sky, and basically just had a cutout in the middle of where the phone was. So when the clip that was underneath played, it's only the phone that was moving. And then I just erased
shadow
a little bit on the wrist there, just so you could see the shadow changing as well.
I think the shadow adds to the effect a lot.
Yeah, and I found that it didn't, on this particular one, the sky didn't look quite right. It moved a little bit as well. So all I did was just use, as I said, an overlay and just erase the area on the phone to create it. Just go down, see if I can find that portrait one. I don't think I've posted any, to be honest. I've seen lots of other people create some really cool effects in the same way with portraits, but yeah, nah, I can't find it.
Yeah, no worries. That's all good. Next time.
Yeah. Need to shoot some more portraits. It's not something
You more drawn to like street photography rather than portraits?
For me, I guess I started out that way, and it's kind of continued. For me, I often like shooting on my own in some instances. I do like traveling with people as well, but something like street photography especially, it's great just walking around the city and just taking it in and shooting. And I've kind of changed a bit over the years, but very introverted, so like having to organize someone else to go and shoot with and a portrait shoot and those type of things was a little bit harder for me initially, but I definitely got better with that. But I still just like landscape, cityscape, and shooting time-lapse and kind of sitting back and chilling out while the camera's going away.
Yeah, that sounds like the way to do it. I like that too.
Yeah, like you said, sometimes depending where you are, you can have a beer and sit back while the time-lapse is going, and put your feet up. So it's nice.
That's the way to do it. Well, we're pretty close to time now. So thank you, everybody. Thank you for the questions. I just wanted to do another quick plug of your artist spotlight video, which we had to play very, very quickly because we ran out of time yesterday. Just gonna have a look. How long does it go for? Oh, it goes for 5 minutes. We don't have quite that long, but I'm just gonna quickly play like a minute of this artist spotlight video, and we'll share a link in chat for you guys to check this out. So let's just have a quick look at that.
I'm TK North, and in this video, I'll be showing you the power of Premiere Pro to create time lapses like this one. longtime photographer Tim Northey, or TK North. Now, one of my favorite things to shoot is time-lapse photography. It's also something that I probably get asked the most questions about as a photographer. So in this video, I'll be running through some of my favorite tools in Premiere Pro that allow you to create time lapses like this one, including these day to night transitions. So I use Premiere Pro for all my video editing. It's really powerful software. It's also not as complicated as you may think. The beauty of Premiere Pro is also...
Cool. So you can check out that video in its entirety. Johanna's just shared a link down in chat. We'll pop it down the bottom of the YouTube clip for this on-demand video as well. So if you're watching this, if you're not watching the live version, you can check that out. It's awesome. And in fact, Yuri is coming on Adobe Live within the hour as well. And
Cool.
she's done an amazing spotlight video too. So stick around for that. I'm just going to quickly bring up our schedule. We're halfway through our week here. So here we are on Thursday with TK, Tim Northey, which was awesome, focusing on time lapses. There's actually a creative challenge with Andrew Hockradall, who is coming up in the next 9 minutes. So stick around for that. And then we're going to be back on with Yori, which will be awesome. And then on Friday, we've got some photo manipulations with Ramez. So yeah, still lots of stuff to come on today. Lots of amazing artists like TK. TK, thank you so much for joining us on Adobe Live last week and also today. It's been awesome learning from you.
Thanks so much for having me. It's been great.
Awesome. Well,
And thanks to everyone in the chat as well for following along.
Yeah, thanks, chat. Thanks so much. Please do stick around. We'll be hanging out in chat, watching Andrew work his magic at Hawk's Gym. Super cool, super fun time. And then, yeah, we'll be back with Yuri today. But yeah, TK, again, thank you so much.
No worries. Thanks, Food.
And we'll see you guys later.